Record 29, Side 1, Lesson number 29, the 29th lesson, Practical section. Our music. There was, we are told, music many centuries ago, and, in fact, a large number of today's folk songs derive from stories which were chanted rather than told. In Great Britain, as in many other countries, the traveling musician or storyteller, called minstrel, was common and popular. He told or recited poetry and, traditionally, accompanied himself on some kind of musical instrument. He was not the first musician, of course, but for the purpose of our short conversation, we may consider him sufficiently near, both in concept and time, to the present day, to act as a starting point. Music, the minstrel probably always composed his own, has changed. Singers, instruments, and whole orchestras are quite different today from their medieval counterparts. Today's chamber music, which comes down to us from some of the greatest masters of musical composition and its many arts, has a much narrower circle of enthusiasts than other categories. Perhaps the popular tune of today, lasting usually for a few weeks, corresponds to the song of the minstrel. But you can imagine the infinite joy of the minstrel if but one of his airs had gained such enormous popularity so quickly and earned enough money for him to live comfortably for a very long time. Naturally, there are different means of communication at the disposal of the composer of today, giving him command not of one village only at a time, but the whole world practically, through the medium of radio, air communications, and the ever-present desire of youth for something new. Classical music, for young people nowadays, is occasionally brought home by means of a theme of one of the masters. Tchaikovsky is often the victim. Freshened, arranged in a slightly altered rhythm, and given exotic words. One must remark how often this type of popular tune remains popular, yet very few of those who admire it know or have ever heard the original. There are, of course, organizations doing wonderful work in bringing home the values of good music to the young, as well as helping them to appreciate it. Other manifestations, somewhat older than the vogue for new popular music all the time, are the opera, which is considered ridiculous by many, because the singers sing their part, and perhaps very often are nothing more than singers, rarely actors and actresses. But a good singer gives us something which a good actor cannot. It is better to be good singers and not so good actors than vice versa, don't you think? Symphonies have recently been written for the strangest instruments. But when we speak of symphonies, it seems natural to the untutored in music to think only of Beethoven, Haydn, and a few other world-famous names. Perhaps we have been badly educated. The world of music is so full of beauty, yet most of us, perhaps because it stirs some primitive instinct in our subconscious, use it only for its rhythmic qualities in order to dance, to march to war, or touch our heartstrings in tender moments, though the words are probably more important to many. If only it were possible to speak in music, the world would have its universal language. We should have to study hard even then. However, we might begin even before we went to school. There must be something fundamental in this art which touches man's emotion. We see that music also has a place in the rhythmic beats of the drum in primitive tribal dances, still practiced in remote parts of the world, where radio and television are unknown. Whether it be jazz, which today has a brief but eloquent half-century's history behind it, or chamber music, which people never play at home nowadays, there is some music which appeals to every one of us. Have you noticed how children like to beat something? The well-meaning uncle who gives a toy drum to his young nephew is so seldom appreciated by the child's parents, the father probably calling him an absolute idiot, but not to his face. Music enters our life almost with the first breath we take, and lingers with us all our life, cheering us, enchanting us, inciting us, and soothing our tangled nerves in dreams, always our humble servant. Or is it?
Side 2, Grammatical section. The possessive case, second part. In lesson 21, the possessive form, which is sometimes called the Saxon genitive, was presented in its fundamental uses. There are, however, useful additional ways of applying this construction, and we are going to show you them in this lesson. The book of the boy is normally not used in English, the form, the boy's book, being preferable. This has already been fully explained. But what happens when there is more than one possessor? The books of Mary and John. In this case, the apostrophe S is placed after the second possessor only. Mary and John's books. This is because the books belong to both of them equally. But where ownership is separate, that is, some of the books belong entirely to one and the remainder to the other, there is no joint ownership, then we have the apostrophe S after both owners. Mary's and John's books, or Mary's books and John's. In the second example, it is not necessary to repeat books after John. the word being understood. This form is also found with the words shop, office, church, house, theatre, cinema. Run to the chemist's for my medicine. I saw Mrs. Smith at the butcher's this morning. We are going to Mother's on Sunday after Mass in St. Peter's. With the exception of both and all, the possessive must be expressed with of, followed by the genitive with apostrophe s, when preceded by an indefinite or demonstrative adjective, the indefinite article, or a number. Both my friends, all your money, but a book of my son's was on the table, or one of my son's books was on the table. Some of your brother's records are in my room, or some records of your brother's are in my room. This table of Uncle John's is very valuable. When there is more than one specification, it is usual to employ the genitive with apostrophe s only in the last case. Here is an example or two. The children of the Queen of England, the Queen of England's children. The slaves of the Lord of the Manor, the Lord of the Manor's slaves. The last word in the apposition paragraph is the one which usually takes the apostrophe s. Look at the following examples. Henry VIII's 6 wives. Richard the Lion-Hearted's crusades. Jones the baker's horse and cart, but Mary the baker's cousin. The comma is absolutely necessary in this last example if we are not to believe that Mary is the baker. With the comma, the sentence means that Mary is the cousin of the baker. If we omit the comma, the meaning is quite different. The cousin of Mary the baker. This form of possessive is normally used when the possessor is a person, but we find it commonly employed in expressions of time and in many idiomatic expressions. Some examples of both are given here below. Today's newspaper, a day's work, 3 weeks' holiday, my sister-in-law's baby, a stone's throw, a moment's hesitation, an hour's journey, the 100 Years' War, someone else's coat, at arm's length. Comparison of adjectives and adverbs, second part. In lesson 22, we said that comparisons between equals required the construction positive as, negative not so as. When the comparison is used with a noun, it has the following form: positive, singular, as much as; plural, as many as; negative, singular, not so much as; plural, not so many as. It is not always correct to use the negative form not so as to indicate inequality. The comparative and superlative forms of little, less and least, and few, fewer and fewest, are sometimes necessary. Then, is placed before the second term of the comparison, while of follows the superlative. Here are some examples with explanations. He hasn't as much money as I. He has less money than I. In the second example, the idea expressed would indicate that I have very little money, but he has even less. There aren't as many books at home as there are in the library. There are fewer books at home than there are in the library. These last two examples give the same impression as the first two examples. With adjectives, they are taller than we. We aren't so tall as they. We are less tall than they. We are shorter than they.